Hi Audacious Athlete crew, and welcome to part 3 of my post lifting cool down series. So this series we are going to cover your quads and hamstrings. So we are going to touch on some quad stretches and we are going to work the opposing muscle stretches, which is your hamstrings. So this will cover maybe some repeated movements from last series and also some new movements that you can focus on for hamstrings, whether or not you need more hamstring detailed work or not. For me personally, I do find that my quads stay the most tight, and my hamstrings, while they are tight, they tend to not be as tight as my quads are. Just a little reminder that the focus of a lot of these stretches are for us to keep our heart elevated while our heart rate is coming down to the ground. So I want to remind you guys to always pay close attention to your overall sensation and feeling before doing any of the movements as we progress to the ones that are lying down on the ground. That's always like the rule of thumb that I'm really trying to hammer into y'all's heads. These stretches and post cool down series are absolutely pertinent to bringing down both the cortisol response from stress and also just allowing the body to take into account the recovery aspect of training, and it starts to kick those things in high gear when you actually do them post lifting. So they are far more effective to be done post lifting rather than like later on in the day, and get you kind of ready for the next chapter, which is the recovery component. So that's why I think that it is very important before jumping into the car, getting stuck in traffic, getting all the anxiousness around your day going at you while your heart rate is still elevated. And just remember that post-workout should have its own routine, just like we do a warm-up leading into our training, just how we do warm-up sets. We need to have that arc in our training. So there definitely does need to be a peak in our training, but we also need to find ourselves coming down at the end of our training session. We need to bring our heart rate down along with our body temperature, along with overall just the sensation and feeling of endorphins that we get from training. We need to let that all settle in and let recovery take a forefront. So let's go ahead and dive right into this quad and hamstring focused cool down and stretching routine. So for me personally, my quads are far more tight than my hamstrings. While my hamstrings are very tight, you'll see in these demonstration videos, I still have a far way to go in hamstring lengthening, and I've come quite a far way in my quad lengthening. But overall, I have had a stronger focus in both my quads lengthening because I knew I had that limitation in my training. So obviously my focus now will be shifting a lot more towards hamstring lengthening. But when you see these demonstration videos, just understand I'm doing them within my best range. And I encourage you to understand when you watch these that I have been practicing in many of these, and I've also probably not come as far along as you all might be in many of these movements. So you will see both advanced movements and modifications because I simply cannot do the advanced movements either. So I do ask that you just watch that with grace for both yourself and what you're able to do, and grace for me and what I'm able to do in my yoga journey and my stretching journey in general. So let's go ahead and dive right into your first movement that you are going to go into from a standing position. So the first movement is your traditional quad stretch where you are standing. You don't see my head in this video, but you do stand, bringing your knee in line with your other knee, and you bring your ankle into the palm of your hand, and you want to hold that stretch before moving into this kneeling hip flexor stretch. So I am utilizing the pad below me and behind me to actually support my foot so I can really relax in this position. I think that's the most important aspect of a lot of these stretches, is to find yourself in the ability to breathe and relax and not create more added tension on your body. Again, we're trying to release the tension from training. So you'll see that I'm kind of shifting my body weight back and forth into my hip flexor, just kind of not letting this be in a complete static stretch for me. Personally, this position in a static sense is very challenging for my hip flexors and for my quads, especially just because it's the first movement in this series of movements that I am doing. So again, my quads are very tight. Post leg day, this is a very difficult movement for me to progress into, but I do believe that the assisted version where you kneel and place your top of your foot onto this platform behind you is going to really help you adjust and kind of move into this full quad stretch and both a hip flexor stretch as well. All right, next movement, which is a movement I'm exceptionally proud of, is both the half camel and the full camel. So you're first seeing the half camel modification, which is kneeling and reaching one arm behind you, trying your best to touch the heel of your shoe. Often when I do these in yoga, I am barefoot, so I do have the benefit of having a shoe on, which makes it a little bit easier actually. But you're utilizing your core rotation to kind of reach each hand behind you, kind of opening up your quads. Now we're gonna go into a full camel, and the full camel, you wanna make sure that your hips are positioned in between your shoes, and you actually utilize your hands behind you up onto your shoes to lift your pelvis forward, open up your quads, and you actually want to press to keep your quads forward, so keeping your quads in line with the joint of your knee. A lot of people want to fall back forward just to be able to reach their hands, and you actually want to focus on keeping that quad lengthened and that quad staying over that knee joint and that hip joint being forward as much as possible, creating that nice arc in the low back and spine. But again, this is the advanced movement, so I do not expect everybody to be able to move out of even a half camel right away unless you are competent and comfortable with doing this position. The next movement is an assisted hero pose. So this assisted hero pose, again, I'm using some sort of platform behind me to rest my shoulders in because I cannot do a full hero pose yet. I am unable to fall completely to the ground and be able to get myself back up out of the hero position. You'll see that I'm definitely struggling even in the assisted version, but with this assisted version, I can actually put my hands over my chest and actually relax and breathe, and I'm still getting the benefit in my quads being lengthened during this static position. We've opened up our quads, it's time to move into the opposing muscle group, which is their hamstrings, and quite a few of these movements will be focused on your head going below your heart. So again, we do want to make sure that our heart rate has come down. So these are hamstring stretches where you're extending one leg, kneeling on the other, and just kind of overall reaching, trying to get your spine as flat as possible as you reach into your hamstrings and get your head towards your knee. Now for me personally, this is a very challenging movement. You'll see how tight my hamstrings are, and I'm still working on trying to bring my chin to my knee here. I do multiple sessions of these and I cannot do them static, so I do make them more of a dynamic movement for me personally. I try to hold static ones as long as I can in yoga, but typically I do have to create this as a dynamic movement rather than a full static stretch. Next, we have a forward fold. So in a forward fold position, you want to actually turn your toes slightly in towards your body, towards your face, heels slightly out. You want as much weight as you can in the balls of your feet, not the heels of your feet. In order to get that full lengthened position in your hamstrings, you do actually want to counterbalance your weight into the balls of your feet. So you'll notice how I'm kind of coming up on my tiptoes to just kind of mentally connect to myself that I need to stay in the balls of my feet and not put pressure and weight into the heels of my feet. This is what it allows your hamstrings to open and lengthen. So then I'm going to move into a modified Skandasana. So a Skandasana is a great hamstring stretch, but you'll notice that my heel is not able to connect into the floor on this stretch on either side. So therefore, you know I'm doing a modification because my heel is staying lifted just because my hamstring is too tight to go into a full Skandasana with my heel pushed down into the ground on the side of which I'm like kind of rotating my body to. All right, so now that I am again fully relaxed, fully ready to come to the ground, we're gonna go into a series of hamstring stretches on the ground. And I really want you guys to not necessarily focus on the leg being stretched, but actually get the knee to the armpit. I do a series of stretches, kind of deep breath, assisting myself within each breath to try to get closer to that knee getting into my armpit. So that's really how I'm opening up my hip joint, opening and lengthening my hamstring, and not only just trying to keep the leg straight. So obviously you do get some lengthening in your hamstring by the knee and leg being stretched, but I feel that you get a lot more deep into the hamstring by bringing that knee to that elbow. And the last thing for both your hamstrings and low back is going to be a seated forward fold. So I always scoop my meat of my glutes out from underneath me before falling forward into that full seated forward fold. And again, this is where you want to lengthen the spine, try to bring your chin to your shins, try to keep that spine as in line as possible. You'll see that I'm trying to keep my low back from rounding and just keep that rounding in the upper part of my body to go ahead and get fully into the hamstrings at that point. All right guys, that wraps up part 3 of this post-lifting cool down series, along with my entire coaching series on post-lifting cool down routines. I hope you guys enjoyed some of these both advanced and modification movements that I've incorporated from my yoga practice into my post-lifting cool down routines. I hope these further protect your tissue health and joint health in the future so you continue to train like the audacious athletes that you are. Stay tuned for our next series featuring assistant coach Brittany Lazan.